Travelers of the night, come closer to the fire. In the age when Baghdad was the center of the world, when the Tigris ran silver under starlight, and the caliphs feasted beneath chandeliers of Persian glass, there sailed a man who should never have returned alive. His name was Sinbad, and he met something in the skies that still haunts the dreams of every sailor who dares the Indian Ocean. Imagine an egg so enormous that seasoned merchants mistook it for the alabaster dome of a lost city. Imagine a shadow that blots out the sun like an eclipse born of flesh and feather. Imagine talons vast enough to snatch an elephant as easily as a falcon takes a sparrow, and a beak that can crack the spine of a whale the way you or I might snap a dry branch. For 1,000 years, the storytellers of Basra, of Muscat, of old Zanzibar whispered of the roc, the Roc, the bird of impossible size, whose very wing beat births storms, whose cry is the thunder that drives men mad. They swore it was fantasy. They swore it was metaphor. They swore it could not be real. But tonight, beneath this same restless moon, I will tell you why the oldest pilots of the Arabian Sea still leave offerings of fresh meat on desolate cliffs, why certain islands are marked on no chart, and why, even now, fishermen drag up bones too colossal for any creature we dare maim. Tonight, we do not speak of gentle nightingales or poetic phoenixes. Tonight, we speak of the terrifying reality of the Roc Bird, the monster that once ruled the heavens, the guardian of forgotten treasures, the nightmare that may never have died at all. Are you ready, my friend, to sail with Sinbad into the storm where the sky itself has teeth? Lean in, my brave listener, for every great terror has humble beginnings, and the roc was no different. Long before the tales were bound between the golden covers of the 1001 Nights, before even the name Sinbad was spoken in the coffee houses of Baghdad, the sailors of the Gulf and the pearl divers of Bahrain told of a bird so vast it could carry off an entire dhow in its talons. They called it Roc in the old tongue, a word that tasted of salt and fear. But the story we know best was first set to paper in the 9th century, during the glittering reign of Harun al-Rashid, the caliph who turned Baghdad into a city of wonders. In those nights, when the house of wisdom burned lamps until dawn, and Greek philosophy danced with Persian poetry, traveling scholars and merchants from Sind, from Zanzibar, from the Malay archipelago, poured into the round city with their cargoes of spice, ivory, and stories. Among them came men who had seen things, men with sun-bleached eyes who spoke little. But when the wine was poured and the oud fell silent, they would lower their voices and describe islands where the sand was white as salt, and the cliffs rang hollow as though something enormous nested within. They spoke of eggs the size of palace domes, pale and faintly veined with blue, warm to the touch, as if a heart the size of a ship beat inside. And they spoke of the parents, shadows that crossed the moon in a single wing beat, whose feathers fell like black sails upon the waves. These fragments drifted through the bazaars until they reached the ears of the great story weavers who served Scheherazade's spiritual descendants. By the 14th century, when Arab scribes in Cairo and Damascus finally gathered the Nights into manuscripts, the Roc had grown into the terror we know. No longer merely large, but a living mountain of beak and claw, a creature that nested atop the mountain of Kaf, where the world ends, a guardian of diamonds so jealous that it would smash ships to splinters rather than let men steal its young. Yet even then, the tellers insisted the bird was real. Ibn Battuta, the greatest traveler of his age, swore in Tangier that the pilots of the Indian Ocean still marked certain latitudes on their charts with a simple drawing, an open beak, and the words, "Allah protect us from the Roc." The Venetian jewel merchant Gasparo Balbi, in 1580, wrote of seeing feathers in the market of Hormuz so enormous that one alone was carried by 4 men, feathers that could only have fallen from the wings of the Roc. And in the oldest Zoroastrian texts of Persia, long before Islam reached those shores, there is mention of the Simurgh's dark cousin, a storm bird that devoured elephants and whose eggs hatched thunder. When Islam came, the name changed, but the fear remained. So why was this story told again and again across centuries, from the courts of caliphs to the campfire of Bedouin smugglers? Because the sea is cruel and men are greedy. Because every sailor who ever chased diamonds on the Valley of Serpents needed to be reminded that some treasures are guarded by forces older and hungrier than kings. Because in a world where jinn walked the empty quarter, and the stars themselves were thought to be campfires of angels, the Roc was the perfect warning. There are things in this world so vast that even the bravest heart must bow, turn back, and thank heaven for the gift of another dawn. Baghdad was already far behind him, a golden memory on the horizon, when Sinbad the Sailor, rich once, ruined once, now rich again, stood on the deck of a new ship bound for the Isles of Spice and Gold. The year was lost to time, but the season was the gentle one, when the monsoon winds blow steady from the southwest and the sea turns the color of polished turquoise. The crew were men of Basra, hard-laughing men with headed beards and amulets of blue glass against the evil eye. They sang as they worked, songs of women waiting on rooftops and of pearls the size of pigeons' eggs. Sinbad watched the dolphins racing the prow and told himself this voyage would be simple. Trade, profit, home. No storms, no islands of the cannibal dead, no more bargains with destiny. Allah, as always, laughed. One dawn, when the sky was the color of fresh pomegranate, the lookout cried out that land lay ahead. But it was no ordinary land. A low white island, perfectly round, rose from the water like the dome of a submerged mosque. The captain, greedy for fresh water, ordered the anchor dropped. The sailors leapt ashore laughing, boots sinking into sand as fine and white as sifted flour. Sinbad walked alone, farther than the rest, until he stood beneath the great curve of the dome itself. It was warm, not sun-warm, but warm like living skin. Faint blue veins threaded its surface, and from within came a slow tidal throbbing, thump, thump, as though a second heart, larger than any whale's, beat just beneath the shell. Sinbad, who had seen wonders and terrors enough for 9 lives, felt the hair rise on his arms. He knew. This was no island. This was an egg. Before he could shout the warning, the sky went dark. Not cloud dark, not storm dark. A living darkness that swallowed the sun whole. The men on the beach looked up and forgot how to scream. High above, circling on wings that stretched from horizon to horizon, came the roc. Imagine it, my friend. Imagine a bird whose body alone was larger than the greatest ship in the fleet of Baghdad, whose feathers were black storm clouds edged with bronze, whose eyes burned yellow as molten gold in a furnace, whose talons curved, black, polished like obsidian swords, could close around an elephant the way a falcon closes around a mouse. The crew ran. Some fell to their knees, pressing foreheads to the sand and begging forgiveness for every sin they had ever committed. Others scrambled back toward the longboats, but the shadow was already descending. The roc did not screech. It made no sound at all beyond the hurricane roar of its wings. Down it came, faster than thought, until the wind of its passage hurled men like dolls. Talons opened, the egg gleamed below, safe beneath its mother's shadow. Sinbad, alone of all men, did not run. He stood transfixed as the great bird blotted out the world. For one impossible heartbeat, he looked into its eye, ancient, pitiless, blazing with the fury of a mother guarding her unborn. Then the talon struck the beach where he had stood a moment before, sinking fathoms deep into the sand. The crew's screams were cut short as the rock rose again, a dozen broken bodies dangling from each claw like beads on a necklace. The ship, cowardly, desperate, had already raised anchor and fled, sails bellied out in terror. Sinbad was alone on the island that was not an island, beneath an egg that pulsed with monstrous life, while far above the parent rock circled once, twice, and then, with a beat of wings that birthed a storm across half the ocean, vanished into the south. Night fell like a blade. Sinbad, the man who had once ridden a whale's back and outwitted giants, curled himself against the warm curve of the egg and waited for death. But death, it seemed, had other plans. Dawn bled across the sky, red as a fresh wound. Sinbad had not slept. How could any man sleep with that monstrous egg throbbing beside him like a war drum? All night he had listened to the ocean hiss against the shell, felt the heat of the unborn rock seeping into his bones. And all night he had watched the father bird, blacker than night itself, circle high above, a dark moon eclipsing the stars again and again. He knew the moment the egg cracked, both parents would descend. He knew he had hours, perhaps minutes. Then Sinbad smiled the smile that had cheated death 6 times before, drew his turban cloth from his head, and began to weave. From the cloth he fashioned a harness of knots no sailor could untie. From the broken spars and rope the fleeing ship had left behind, he built loops strong as iron. And when the sun rose fully, when the egg began to rock, and fissures of pale light appeared across its dome, Sinbad lashed his waist and chest to the 2 greatest talons of the dead men still dangling from the beach, talons the size of scimitars. He lay down among the corpses, closed his eyes, and waited. The sky screamed. The father rock came first, a thunderbolt of bronze and shadow, wings spanning the world. Behind him, riding the storm he birthed, came the mother, larger still, her cry a sound that shattered thought itself. They met above the egg in a hurricane of feathers. The shell exploded outward in shards the size of shields, and from the ruin rose the chick, already the size of a palace, wet and hideous, its beak gaping like a pink cavern, its blind eyes searching for meat. The parents greeted their child with cries that drove fish belly up for leagues around. Then the father rock stooped to the beach, talons opening to gather the offering of broken sailors for the newborn's first meal. Sinbad felt the world lift. One moment he lay on blood-warm sand. The next he was torn into the sky, ropes biting into his flesh, the wind ripping the breath from his lungs. The dead men swung around him like ghastly fruit. Below, the island shrank to a speck, then vanished. The sea became a wrinkled cloth of sapphire and jade. Up they rose, up past the gulls that fell dead from terror, up until the air thinned and ice formed on Sinbad's beard, up until the curve of the earth itself could be seen, and the stars burned cold even at noon. The roc flew south, toward mountains no chart has ever named, toward a valley sailors whisper of only in madness. The Valley of Diamonds, where the glittering stones lie so thick no man can walk without cutting his feet, guarded for eternity by serpents as long as caravans, and by the rocs who use the serpents as we use hounds. At last, the great bird banked. Sinbad looked down and saw it, a nest woven from entire cedar trees, a crater atop a peak that pierced the clouds. In the center glittered a lake of diamonds, flashing like fallen stars. The roc hovered, its talons opened. Sinbad cut his ropes with the small dagger he had kept hidden, dropped like a stone through freezing air, and landed, rolling in a fortune that would ransom every king from Cathay to El Andalus. Around him reigned the broken bodies of his former crew, food for the chick that was already winging after its parents, mewling with hunger. But Sinbad laughed through bloodied teeth. He filled his turban, his robes, every fold of cloth with diamonds the size of pomegranates. And when night fell and the rocs slept, curled around their monstrous child like storm clouds around a mountain, Sinbad crept to the edge of the nest, tied himself to the leg of a vulture the size of an elephant, one of the roc's lesser cousins, and waited for dawn. When the vultures rose to scavenge the valleys below, they carried Sinbad with them, down, down through cloud and screaming wind, until at last he cut free and fell into the hands of merchants who thought him a ghost risen from the sea. He returned to Baghdad richer than Croesus, with diamonds that still carried the faint warmth of the roc's nest, and with silence about the price others had paid. In the traditional telling, Sinbad ends the voyage here, alive, wealthy, and wise enough never to speak lightly of the sky again. But the oldest manuscripts, the ones locked away from common eyes, add one final line, whispered only when the lamps burn low. On certain nights, when the wind howls from the south, Sinbad would wake screaming, clawing at his chest as though ropes still bound him. And in the courtyard of his palace the servants would find enormous black feathers, feathers that had not been there the night before.
Come, lean in once more. The tale is finished, but the truth is only now uncoiling. For centuries, the scholars of Europe laughed at the roc. A sailor's exaggeration, they said in their cold libraries. A whale mistaken for a bird. An albatross swollen by frightened eyes. They were wrong. In the year 1298, in a prison cell in Genoa, Marco Polo dictated a memory that still chills the blood. He wrote of an island called Madagascar, where the people spoke of a bird they named the Anka, so huge that it could lift an entire rhinoceros into the air. The great Khan himself showed Marco a single feather, 12 paces long, black as midnight, the quill thick as a ship's mast. Even the skeptical Venetian admitted he could find no lie in the Khan's eyes. Then came the bones. In 1851, on the lonely island of Rodriguez in the Mascarenes, French sailors unearthed femurs longer than a man is tall. In the caves of Madagascar, explorers found eggshell fragments thick as porcelain plates, large enough to bathe a child inside. And on the highest cliffs of the Arabian Peninsula, Bedouin guides will still show you hollows in the rock where something vast once nested, and scattered around them the vertebrae of whales. Whales carried hundreds of miles from the sea. The scientists, when they finally came, gave the creature a colder name, Aepyornis maximus, the elephant bird of Madagascar, the largest bird that ever lived. 10 feet tall, 1,000 pounds of muscle and claw, eggs that held 2 gallons of yolk, the very domes Sinbad mistook for islands. It did not fly, but its cousins, the thunderbirds of Argentina with 30-foot wingspans, did. And in the age when Sinbad's true ancestors sailed frankincense routes down the coast of Africa, those giants still walked the earth or soared above it. The rock, then, was never pure fantasy. It was memory. A memory of the last age when the sky itself hunted. But there is more shadow than bone in this story. To the old pearl divers of the Gulf, the rock was never merely a bird. It was the wrath of forgotten gods, the guardian spirit of treasures men were not meant to take. The Valley of Diamonds? Real enough. A high ravine in the Hindu Kush, where flashes of light in the cliffs are still, to this day, raw diamonds washed down by ancient floods. And the serpents? King cobras longer than 3 men, guardians as jealous as any rock. In Sufi poetry, the rock became the Simurgh's dark twin, the soul that has forgotten mercy, the ego grown so vast it blots out the Son of God. Fly too high on pride, the mystics warned, and the rock will carry you off to a nest from which no prayer returns. Even now, in the fishing villages of Oman and Yemen, when a storm comes sudden and black from the south, the old captains lower their sails and whisper "Ruh" under their breath. They leave goat carcasses on certain headlands at dusk, offerings just in case.
and drone footage from the Socotra archipelago has captured shadows crossing the moon that no known creature should cast. So, I leave you with this, my sleepless friend. The elephant bird is extinct. The thunderbirds are dust. But extinction is a word invented by men who have never heard the wind scream over an empty ocean at midnight. Somewhere on an island no satellite has yet named, an egg the color of pearl still warms beneath a shadow vast enough to eclipse the sun. And it is waiting.
And so, my faithful companion of the night, our tale folds its wings and settles back into the sands. We began beneath the blood-red moon, and we end beneath the same, for the moon is the only witness that never blinks. Sinbad returned to Baghdad, grew old among his gold and his ghosts, and when at last death came for him, quietly, in his sleep, they say the palace windows rattled, though no wind stirred, and a single black feather drifted down into the courtyard, like a dark leaf from a tree that has no place in this world. The rock never truly left us. It lives in the hush that falls over a dow when the sky suddenly empties of gulls. It lives in the wide eyes of children who hear the old men speak of shadows that swallow fishing boats whole. It lives every time a pilot, flying over the empty quarter, glances at his radar and sees nothing, yet feels the aircraft lifted a hand's breadth by a wind that comes from nowhere. We have walked the line tonight, you and I. The thin golden thread between what was and what might still be, between the bones of extinct giants and the nightmares that refuse to die with them. Look up the next time you stand by the sea under a full moon. If the stars vanish for a single heartbeat, if the waves fall silent as though listening, remember Sinbad's ropes biting into his chest. Remember the warm curve of an egg larger than any mosque. And remember the roc, the last sovereign of the sky, who may only be sleeping. The fire is ash now. The desert wind carries away the smoke like a secret it was never meant to keep. Go gently, traveler. Keep one eye on the heavens. And subscribe if you dare for 1,001 more nights beneath this same restless moon. Until the next tale calls us back to the fire. Allah protect you from every shadow with wings. May the sky stay empty.